There are moments in life so small, so quiet, that most people would never speak about them. They happen in silence. They leave no noise behind. And yet, they linger in the soul. One of those moments happens during Holy Communion. You approach the altar as you always do. You receive the host. You return to your place. Everything seems normal. But then, something unexpected happens. The host does not dissolve as usual. It remains. It clings gently to the palate of your mouth. Not painfully, not dramatically, just present. And in that instant, a thought crosses the heart. What does this mean? Is it merely physical? Is it coincidence? Or is something deeper unfolding in the spiritual realm? For many believers, this moment brings unease. For others, a quiet awe. And for some, a deep, unexplainable emotion, as if heaven itself paused for a second. This is not about superstition. This is not about fear. And this is not about inventing signs where none exist. This is about understanding the language of reverence, the language of the soul, and the language God sometimes uses when words are not necessary. Because the spiritual life is not always loud, often it speaks in whispers, and sometimes it speaks in moments that feel too small to mention, yet too powerful to ignore. Before we go deeper, I invite you, if reflections like this nourish your faith and your interior life, to subscribe to the channel. Here we explore the spiritual meaning behind everyday moments of faith, with reverence, depth, and clarity. Your presence helps this message reach more souls who are searching, questioning, and longing for understanding. Now, let us continue. When the host seems to remain, when it does not immediately dissolve, many people rush to explanations. Some say, it's just dryness, it's just the body, it's nothing. And yes, the Church teaches us prudence, to avoid exaggeration, to remain grounded. But prudence does not mean blindness. The Church has never taught that every unusual moment is meaningless. Rather, it teaches discernment. And discernment begins by asking the right question, not is this supernatural, but rather, what is this moment inviting me to become aware of? Because God does not force signs upon us. He invites reflection. In the spiritual life, there are moments when God allows us to notice what we usually receive automatically. Think about it. How often do we receive the Eucharist without truly pausing? Without fully realizing whom we are receiving? Routine can dull even the most sacred realities. And sometimes grace interrupts routine, not to shock, not to frighten, but to awaken. The host remaining, even briefly, can become a moment of heightened awareness, a gentle reminder that this is not ordinary bread, that this is not merely a symbol, that this is not a gesture to rush through. It is presence, real, living, sacred. Spiritual tradition teaches that when something interrupts our automatic behavior during prayer or sacrament, it often invites interior recollection, not panic, not speculation, but silence, a silence that listens. Because the soul understands things the mind cannot immediately explain. In that moment, many feel an unexpected stillness, others feel exposed. Some feel deeply loved, and some feel confronted, not with condemnation, but with truth. The Eucharist reveals the state of the heart, not by accusation, but by proximity. Light reveals without speaking, and when the host remains, even for a short time, it can become a mirror, not of worthiness or unworthiness, but of attention. Am I present, or merely performing a habit? Am I receiving or simply passing through? This is why the spiritual meaning does not lie in the physical phenomenon itself, but in what it awakens within the soul. God does not need signs to be present, but He sometimes allows moments that slow us down, because love desires attention. And love, when ignored too often, becomes silent. But when love is received, even imperfectly, it stays. In the next block, We will explore how the soul responds to sacred presence, why some moments feel heavier, deeper, or more intense, and how reverence itself shapes what we experience in communion. To understand the deeper meaning behind such moments, we must speak about something rarely discussed with honesty: interior disposition. Not emotion, not feeling, but the posture of the soul. Two people can receive the same host, at the same Mass, at the same altar, and experience something entirely different, because communion is not merely an external act, it is an encounter, and every encounter is shaped by how open we are to receiving it. Spiritual tradition teaches that the soul is not passive during communion, it participates. Even when the body is still, the soul is either open or distracted, attentive or closed, hungry or indifferent. This is why moments of unusual awareness during communion often coincide with inner silence, when the mind is not racing, when the heart is not rehearsing worries, when the soul is not rushing ahead. In such moments, grace finds space. And when grace finds space, it settles, not because God needs permission, but because love respects freedom. The Eucharist does not force intimacy, it offers it. And sometimes, when the host seems to remain longer than expected, it reflects something already happening within. The soul has paused, the world has quieted, and for a brief moment there is room. Room for presence. This is not mystical exaggeration, it is spiritual logic. A distracted heart receives hurriedly, an attentive heart receives deeply, and depth always slows things down. In prayer, saints have long taught that when God grants a soul a deeper awareness of his nearness, time behaves differently. Minutes feel like seconds, seconds feel heavy, moments stretch, not because the clock changes, but because the soul has stopped running. During communion, this interior stillness can manifest physically in subtle ways. The host remaining briefly can become a symbol, not imposed from outside, but emerging from within. A sign not meant to be analyzed outwardly, but received inwardly. Because the Eucharist is not a spectacle, it is intimacy, and intimacy always demands reverence. Reverence is not fear, it is attention. It is the soul saying, I know who is here. In a culture that rushes, consumes, and moves on, reverence feels almost foreign. We rush through meals, through conversations, through prayer. And yet, reverence slows us without effort. It does not require force. It simply happens when awareness awakens. This is why some experience communion as fleeting, while others experience it as weighty and profound. The difference is not God, it is attention. And attention changes everything. When the host remains, it can gently confront the soul with a question that needs no words. Are you aware of what you are receiving? Not as judgment, but as invitation, an invitation to remain as well, to not rush back to routine, to not immediately move on, to stay. The spiritual life deepens not through dramatic visions, but through moments of staying. Staying in silence, staying in awareness, staying with presence. This is why the Church encourages thanksgiving after communion. Not because God needs thanks, but because the soul needs time. Time to absorb what cannot be grasped instantly. Time to let presence do its work. Grace works quietly. It rearranges the interior landscape. It softens resistance. It illuminates blind spots, and all of this happens without sensation. But when a soul is receptive, even subtle moments can feel powerful. Not emotional, but real. The host remaining can become a reminder that the Eucharist is not consumed like ordinary food. It is received, and receiving implies humility. It implies openness. It implies surrender. One does not dominate what is sacred. One yields to it. This is why reverence is not about perfection. It is about availability. A soul that knows it is weak but open often receives more deeply than a soul that feels strong but closed. Because grace fills what is empty, and emptiness is not lack, and it is space. There is another dimension that must be approached with honesty and humility. Not every soul experiences peace during communion. Some feel dryness, others feel distance, some feel nothing at all. And this does not mean failure. The spiritual life is not measured by sensation. At times, the host remaining briefly can occur during moments of interior resistance, not rebellion, but tension. The soul may be carrying unspoken wounds, unresolved guilt, fear of surrender, attachment to control. Grace does not flee these conditions. It enters them, and when it does, it often slows the encounter, not to accuse, but to heal. God never forces transformation. He invites cooperation. The Eucharist meets the soul where it truly is, not where it pretends to be. And sometimes the soul is divided. One part desires God, another part holds back. In such moments, grace does not overwhelm, it waits. The host remaining can become a silent testimony of patience, a reminder that God is not in a hurry, even when we are. Resistance does not repel grace, indifference does. But resistance still cares, it still wrestles. And wrestling implies relationship. This is why moments of awareness during communion can stir discomfort instead of peace. Light reveals. And revelation is not always pleasant at first, but it is always medicinal. The Eucharist exposes without humiliating. It convicts without condemning. It invites without coercing. The soul that feels unsettled after communion should not be afraid. That unease may be the first movement of healing, because healing begins with truth, and truth is gentle, but firm. The host remaining even briefly can awaken a question buried deep within. What am I holding back? Not as accusation, but as opening. God never reveals wounds to shame us. He reveals them to touch them, and touch heals. The Eucharist is not static. It is not a ritual frozen in time. It is a living encounter. Presence responds to presence, not physically, but relationally. When we speak of the host remaining, we are not speaking of magic or symbolism. We are speaking of relationship. And relationship unfolds at its own pace. Love does not rush intimacy. In human relationships, moments of silence often signal depth. The same is true here. When words fall away, presence remains. This is why some moments during communion feel suspended, as if time itself softened, not because something extraordinary must be declared, but because attention deepened, and attention changes perception. God does not change. We do. And when we slow down enough to notice him, the encounter feels heavier, fuller, more real. The Eucharist is not meant to be experienced emotionally. It is meant to be received, and receiving takes time. This is why rushing away immediately after communion often leaves the soul empty. Not because grace departed, but because it was never welcomed to stay. The soul must learn to remain with what it receives. Stillness is the language of reverence. It is important to say this clearly. Moments like these do not declare holiness. They do not predict destiny. They do not elevate one soul above another. They invite silence. They invite gratitude. They invite humility. They ask nothing dramatic, only presence. If the host remained, even briefly, the most appropriate response is not interpretation, but thanksgiving, not analysis, but adoration, not fear, but surrender. Because God does not speak through signs to confuse, but to draw closer. And closeness always simplifies. It strips away excess meaning and leaves only one truth. You are not alone. You are seen, you are received, you are loved. The Eucharist is God's way of staying with humanity, staying with weakness, staying with longing, and sometimes it invites us to stay too. In the end, the spiritual meaning behind such moments is not found in explanations. It is found in response. Do we slow down? Do we remain in silence? Do we allow ourselves to be changed? The host does not cling to prove anything. It invites attention. It invites reverence. It invites the soul to recognize that the most sacred realities often arrive quietly, without spectacle, without noise, without force. God does not shout during communion. He remains, and remaining is the deepest form of love. If this reflection helped you see Holy Communion with greater reverence and depth, I invite you, now at the end, to subscribe to the channel. Here, we continue to explore the silent mysteries of faith, helping the soul listen where the world rushes past. Stay, remain, and let presence do what only presence can do.